So, this week we're continuing to go through James here, and we're at the end of James chapter 3. And as we're moving forward through this letter, there's something that I really want you to understand. Kind of as James goes through this letter, he has, when he gets into chapter 2, he's got all of this about dead faith, not saving faith, and then as he gets into chapter 3, he's got a lot of just, this is what it is to have, last week I labeled my message, do you understand? And it was like, do you understand what it is to have a godless spirit within you? Like, do you understand the disobedient side of our flesh that is trying to come out in this greed and the selfishness? And do you understand the core of the problem? Do you understand the core of the problem? And I labeled this message knowing the problem, but I probably should have labeled this knowing the answer or something like that, because this week I want you to understand like the good and the bad within us, and where exactly is the struggle? Where exactly is our greatest battle? And if we're trying to serve and honor God, if we're trying to live pleasing to God, where should we focus? Like if James is telling us in this crux of the book, like this is the important stuff right here, we should be like, oh, okay, what is the important things that I must know to do and obey in Christianity? I ought to know this must be very, very important. And, as I think of finding the problem, I used to watch the Minnesota Twins, a lot when I was really young. This is probably back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I remember we had a shortstop, and he was very good, Christian Guzman. And man, he would just over and over, he would bunt for a base hit over and over and over. He was just so fast, just lightning fast, and he'd steal around the bases, steal, and he'd steal home pretty often. And he got hurt. And they put in this guy, Denny Hocking. I called him Double Play Denny. Terrible. I felt like every time we were in position to score, he hits into a double play. He was batting like, he was batting like 150 or something. I was like, oh, why? He's ruining everything. I was like, why even watch? Every time we get something going, it's like he's up to bat. And I was like, he's killing us. He is killing us. And I think that here we need to understand what is killing our Christian walk. We need to switch some things out. We need to understand what we need to be doing to be winning as far as living this Christian life. We need to understand what is the important thing that if Jesus told us, this is what I want of you in obedience, what would you say it is, and what is it? What ought we to be? So I think that when we think about obeying Christ, first off, we should think of love, right? Paul says in Romans 13:8, he says, owe no man anything except to love one another, for the one who loves has fulfilled the law. He says it's going to come from this heart that cares, right? He says this is where our mind should go when we say, what does Jesus want? He wants me to love and care. He wants me to be loving, caring. This is the basis that we're going to start with always, as we're trying to understand what it is. So James has come, I hit the microphone. That means this is going to be a very important message. But now I lost myself. I haven't done that in a while. I was due for a lose myself here. But anyway, as James is coming through this message, and he's just coming off of the tongue, right? And in chapter 3, it's been all about the tongue, and the tongue exposes the rotten, wicked heart. The tongue exposes this greedy, selfish, snobbish, snotty, rotten personality within, right? That's where we're coming off of. So now James is flipping the switch to what is it to have a good spirit within you? That is what is the good within us? What is it to be godly, to be Christian? What is the important things that we must have as he goes into this? And this is kind of where we left off last week. But he's talking about how all of these things, when people think they can be snobbish and arrogant and pushy and have their own way in the earth, and he says that's the teaching of demonic things, that is unspiritual and ungodly, and that is so wrong and bad and all of these things. But then he says this, he says in verse 17 of chapter 3, he says, but the wisdom that comes from above, which he means if you want to know what Jesus really wants of you, if you want to know the truth of what we absolutely ought to be, this is it. This is it. So no, if you want to know obedience, this is going to be it right here. This is going to be obedience. And he says the wisdom that comes from above is first pure. And I think, having a pure heart that is humble before God, having a heart that is like, a pure heart is like somebody, oh God, I desire to please you. Like a soft heart that is like, God, I desire to do what is right. So it's, first off, you need to be kind of separated from like wickedness. You need to first kind of humble yourself before God before you begin the process of this is godly living. This is obedience. So if I was to ask you, what would Jesus say if he said, I'm going to tell you what obedience is, what I want? What would you expect him to say? So this is what he says. He says, it is peaceable. Peaceable. Would that be your first thing? What Jesus really wants of me is that I would be a peaceable person, that I would be quiet and just a soft, gentle, quiet individual, that I would be a peaceable individual, that this would be godliness. Would that be what and this is why I ask, do people know what God actually wants? He's coming off the phrase that these demonic things that we come up with are coming straight out of the pit of hell that roll off of our tongue with the flame of the demonic teaching. And he says, do you want to know what I actually want? Do we actually know what Jesus wants? He says, it needs to be peaceable. Let your actions be peaceable. And then I think of this, I think in Proverbs 16:32, it says this, whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty. You think of like the most, I don't know, like I think of like an Olympic athlete or something. You think of the champion of champions, and you're like, whoa, there is a mighty individual, like a conqueror. And Jesus says, you know what? If someone can control their temper, they outdid the greatest of the great, because they controlled that spirit that would have come rolling off the tongue. He says, this is what I'm looking for. And then he says this, he who rules his spirit is better than he who takes a city. He says there could be this conquering warrior coming in, he's in his chariot, dun, 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 everybody's like, praise this guy, he did single-handedly, he's like Hercules or Achilles or whatever the great warriors were, Oh, he says, wait, if someone controls their spirit within them, they outdid the greatest of the mighty, of the conquering, anybody. If you just controlled your spirit within you, if you would just have gentleness within you, you outdid this. This is greater than the great things of the great accomplishments of the world, that you would just control your attitude within you. It is so important. Then he says this, the next one he lists is to be gentle. And I think as we think about this, so many people think, this is like an unnecessary, I do this and I do this and I do this. Does he really want me to be a gentle person? Is this really, and I think so I'm just telling you, this is the most underrated thing there is. I don't know, maybe I just live in a different world, okay? Where people don't understand that God says, if I was to tell you what I would want you to be a gentle individual. And I think, do people even realize this? People say, I do these things and I am obedient to God and I do all of these things, there's obedience. Did you understand the heart core problem that Jesus says, if I was to tell you what you ought to be, I would have said gentle. Did we know that? Did we understand the obedience that Jesus really wanted out of us? And I just think how underrated these things are. And just having this, just a soft, gentle personality. This is godliness. This is the wisdom that comes from Jesus Christ. This is his teaching for us. And I think, the next one here says open to reason. And so, Claire's in the nursery. We're good for now. So, we're watching this TV show this week, and it's like, I don't know what it is, something's kitchen, Cook's Kitchen, I don't know what it is, this kitchen show. And these people are competing in this competition in this cooking show. And this one team is this husband and wife, and this guy's wife has died. And he's old and he's bald, and he married this young blonde. And so my wife looks at me, she's like, so if I die, are you going to go find a young blonde? I was like, sometimes I enjoy giving my wife a hard time. But when I say that, I don't mean it in a mean way. Like, she may tell you different. She'll tell you on women's group on Wednesday. It doesn't look like she's listening. Maybe she is. But anyway, she'll tell you. But I don't think I've ever said anything cross to my wife. I don't think I've ever said any harsh or unloving words to her. I don't think I've ever acted in any way that was abrasive towards her. I think I've always been gentle and loving towards her in everything I've done. But now and then, I like to push her buttons a little bit. So it's like, I was like, I don't know. I mean, like, she's like, well, would you just find a younger woman, I was like, I don't know. I suppose it may be better. I don't know. And she's like, well, what do you mean by that? And I was like, well, you asked the question, right? I mean, I don't know where we're going with this. And then I said this. I was like, I can tell you this. Above all, I would choose a very gentle, peaceable individual, because that beauty goes beyond all beauty, and I can tell you, I would not choose drama. I guarantee. I was like, you could have some beautiful, gorgeous person, and that hideousness that comes off of the mouth or the attitude makes it disgusting. I guarantee you that I would choose a very soft, gentle individual, because that is beauty to me. And I'm honest about that. I mean, that is true, absolute, beautiful beauty. And that would be my choice. And she's like, well, what do you mean by that? What are you trying to say? I'm like, you can't win. You never can win. And I say, this is why I say, I would choose somebody who is open to reason. Case in point, right? There's no winning. And I'm sure I'm in trouble now. But, and I'm not saying she's not. I'm just saying, you asked a question, you wanted an answer, you don't want an answer, I don't know what to say. I would choose you again. Well, I don't know what to say. But anyway, I'm just saying how wonderful that Christianity, at its core of what we are supposed to be, is also the most beautiful people on the face of earth. That what Jesus Christ desires of us is also the most admirable, most precious thing that we could desire to find in someone. How wonderful is that? That Christianity, if you find somebody who's living it, and this should hit home with us, right? If you find somebody who's living it, they should be amazing to be around. They should be an absolute joy to be with. And then you ask yourself, well, how many people live godly, right? That really puts the question to where is the church in do you get what I'm saying? Like, if this is who Christians are and what it really is to have the Spirit of Christ, like Christ's likeness and fruit of the Spirit, to be living Christian, how many of us are living that? Because then you ask how many of your friends are that sort of person to be around, and that really puts it to us in that way. So moving on, it says that James says this next. He says that Christianity, the wisdom from God, the wisdom from above, is full of mercy and good fruits. They are merciful and gracious, and like we all know, no matter how hard we try, we will mess up sometimes. And how wonderful to have somebody who's merciful, who has mercy, who's not like, they're not out to just cut everybody down, and they're not out to be like, oh, I met with so-and-so, and they were just, it's just like, they are full of mercy. There is somebody I want to be around. I want to be around somebody who's merciful. I want to be around somebody who's not putting a knife in my back when I turn. I want merciful people. I love merciful people. This is so good. Good. Like, they are merciful. This is Christianity as well. Do we understand that this is what is so important when James lays out the heart of the importance? Merciful people, and it's how wonderful that is. And then it says this, it says impartial and sincere. And they're like, okay, I had a lot of plans I was thinking would be great and fun or we should do, but that's okay. We can do that. How great is that? Like somebody who's like, I don't have to insist on my way. I don't have to be like, oh, well, what about me? I wanted to have that. No, they're just like, I'm impartial. That's okay. I had come to the table with some different ideas, but, I can go that way with it too. Like, I'm not somebody who's just set in my ways. I'll just bend this way or that way to make everyone else comfortable. How great is that person, right? This is Christianity. And I don't think people know this. Like, I don't think people really say, if Jesus Christ was to say, this is what I want out of you guys, I don't think people know that. I don't think they get that. I don't think they realize that this is the core of Christianity. I personally don't think people know this. And it's just impartial and sincere. And then it says this in verse 18. It says, a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. And righteousness is like the obedience that pleases God. Like it is godly, holy living. And when somebody is making peace, and they're this peaceable person who seeks for peace, who's like, instead of having a fight and a quarrel when we meet up together, I'll be like, I can bend this way, or I can bend that way, or I'll put you first, or I'll put your will first, and I'm just gentle and easygoing sort of person. And they're like growing a crop of what God says, yes, you're growing a field of, you're like making other people at peace around you, and you're changing things for, like, you are doing it. This is like this is the thing that I have desired of you, and you're growing this crop before me of righteousness by being peaceful and making peace by the people that you're around. And this is what it is. This is what it is to live peaceable and to be like that. And I just think so many Christians, I think a little bit of like Cain and Abel. Abel's like, he's like, God, this is what I'm going to give you. Cain says, God, this is what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you the fruit of my garden. That's the sacrifice you desire. But God's like, that's not what I asked for. And how many Christians say, oh, I live godly, I just can't control my attitude, and I have a hard time with people, but I do all these godly things, and I go to this church, and I try to but just the core of what he's actually asked for, they're not even trying to give to God. They're just like, God, I offer you a sacrifice. The Bible says that God, the sacrifice he desires is a broken and contrite heart, humility to be emptied out of the selfness that is within us. This is the sacrifice that God wants. And so many people say, well, that's I don't know if that's for me. I'm just, why would I be this gentle person? I just don't think we realize that it comes down to this. When Jesus says, and when I've said so many times that James and Jesus teach very similar things. They both say very similar things. Maybe it's having the same parents. Maybe it's that Jesus taught James a lot of things, or maybe all of the above. But Jesus says this in Matthew 5:3. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed is the person who humbles himself, who empties out that greedy, selfish, I got to have it my way, who just pours that out and becomes this gentle, peaceable person, and they own the kingdom of heaven. That is my people. How important is it? Is it important? I would say it's awfully important. He says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the people who are so concerned about what is right, and so concerned that it's like they're in sorrow for sin, they're in sorrow for what is wrong. They've just really emptied this arrogance out of themselves. And Jesus is going to take them in. They will be his people. And then he says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. He says, that humble person who is not pushy, not demanding, not wanting their own way, not got that bitter jealousy flowing off the tongue that he says is demonic. Those people, I will give this earth to them. It will be theirs. What does that say for the people who did not? What does that say? I'm begging you to ask yourself, is James talking about something important or a trivial attitude? Is this an attitude that is like, whoa? Or is this an attitude like, where do you rank that? Where do you rank these things? And then he says this, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. When you have a merciful person, this is just what James is saying. He says they are going to receive the mercy of God. And then he says this, he says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This is just what James is saying. It starts with that pure heart. And then he says these people will see God. It's so important that they have these things. And then he says this, he said, blessed are the peacemakers. And he says, He says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God." This is what James is saying. James is saying the person who lives this gentle, peaceable life, sowing a harvest of peace, that God says, this is the righteousness that I'm looking for. They got it. This peaceful person, Jesus says, I'm going to say, those ones are my children. What does that say for the arrogant world? What does that say for the people who don't control the Spirit? What does that say for the people who live their life spitting out like harshness or demandingness or must have or greed or jealousy or the life that they live in a demanding aspect? When Jesus says, I'll say that's my child right there, the ones who are making peace and living this peaceful life, those are my children right there. What does that say about the importance of it? I mean, how important is this? And I just think it's just so underrated. And then I'll close with this, and James says this in chapter 4, verse 1. He says this, he says, what causes quarrels and fights among you? And he says, is it not that your passions are at war within you? He says, is there not something battling against godliness within you? He says, when you start fighting and quarreling and these things burst out off of your mouth and your tongue, he says, is there not some demonic force that's trying to uprage against godliness? He says, is there not a war raging within you? And, as I think of this, we need to understand what is taking us down. We need to understand what is causing us to not win this game. What is causing us to fail, or what is it to live godly? What is Jesus saying? What is he looking for in us? And I think so many times, in closing, I just want you to think, I don't even know how to say this, okay? Because it's so harsh, and I don't want you to build a doctrine off what I'm about to say, because salvation is by grace through faith. But I'm telling you, if you see someone who is harsh towards people, or they outburst jealousy, quarrels, things like this, they have this fighting nature, and they're claiming to be a Christian, is it unreasonable to say that they would not be called the children of God? Would it be unreasonable to say they will not inherit the earth? Would it be reasonable to flip the script and say everything that's said about those who are peaceable will not be said about those who are not peaceable? Would it be fair to do that? Would it be fair to look at the context of James's letter? And when James says dead works, he says this is not saving lifestyle, and he provides the lifestyle for us, and he says this lifestyle that is a harsh tongue is from demonic forces, and this lifestyle that is good is from God. And when James says that, he says, can a spring pour forth salt water and fresh? Can you be good and bad? When he says, are grapes gathered from our thorns, or figs gathered from grapevines? Do you ever get the wrong fruit from the right plant? Is it fair? Because I have this horrible feeling run through me when I see someone who claims to be a Christian, and they're harsh in their speaking, they're harsh in their tongue, they don't bend to give, to be gracious and gentle and kind and caring. They don't do that. They're harsh and demanding. And something horrible runs through me, and I say, oh no, they don't possess the fruit of the Spirit. They didn't let the Spirit win in their lives. They possess the teaching of demonic teaching that James says, that is you first. And I'm not saying take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I'm not building salvation based off of your attitude, but I am saying, what is James saying? This is the evidence we should look for. And I'm just telling you, just literally in closing this time, I'm just telling you, I don't think people know what to look for. I don't. I don't think people say, what does Jesus want you to be and live? And I don't think people say, he wants me to be peaceable. I don't think they understand what God wants out of Christianity. I don't think they understand the foundation of who are the people of God and what the fruit of the Spirit is. What is it to have Christ in you and have the right fruit, right? I don't think they know. general statement. I don't think the church knows. I've been in churches that are horrible and fight on church softball teams and arrogant attitudes in board meetings and fighting, quarreling, and I don't think the bulk of the world would say God wants peaceableness out of me and mercy and gentle and giving. That he desires to be his children. I don't think that is the primary fruit that they would point out first. I think that they would point to more other things, but I'm telling you, I can't stress, out of 1 to 10 ratio, this is an 11. This is an 11, the fruit of the Spirit, like according to James. This is so important. I just can't tell you the importance of look at your life. Look at your life and say, am I doing what Jesus, or is this the teaching of men that is spiritual, unspiritual, and demonic? Or have I listened to the wisdom that is from above? This is the wisdom from above, and it's different than we think. It's different than we thought it would be. It is a very different. And do we know the wisdom that comes from Jesus, our teacher? Do we know what he asked of us? So important. And now I'm closing. All right. Our God and Father, I just pray that you would just help us to be what you want us to be. Please help us to understand what you actually desire of us, and help us to cross-check ourselves and say, Lord, do we listen to the wisdom that is from above? Do we listen to the wisdom that is earthly and unspiritual? Do we listen to the wrong things? Do we look at what you actually asked us to be? Do we look at the things that you say, these are first and primary, and do we actually make them first and primary? Do we humble our hearts? Are we humbled before you? Are we what you want us to be? Are we susceptible to the fruit of the Spirit, to let the Spirit move into our lives and work and change our lives? And I just pray that you just help us, give us this understanding and give us the strength to do so, Lord. And I just pray this in your Son's name. Amen.